Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. In today's video, we are going to touch on whether or not Christopher Watts has autism. Now, I've heard a lot of people on YouTube discussing that they believe that Christopher Watts has Asperger's. Most people came to this conclusion after watching the infamous Sermon on the Porch. And people who believe that he has Asperger's typically do not believe that he is a narcissist. So I would like to address that misinformation. Now, Asperger's is actually no longer a diagnosis in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, also known as the DSM-5, and it's now covered under the diagnosis Autism Spectrum Disorder. Now, clinically, people with autism and personality pathologies have very little in common. What is autism? Well, it's a complex neurological and developmental disorder that affects the way a person acts, communicates, learns, and interacts with other people. Now, whether or not it is noticed or understood, it would be hard to find an individual who hasn't been wounded by interacting with a person who suffers from either autism or narcissistic personality disorder. For example, you may have been insulted by someone in an unexpected way, and it could leave you with hurt feelings or maybe feeling unworthy in some way. You may think that this person is someone who doesn't have any feelings, and you may have a difficult time trying to decide whether or not their insult was intentional or accidental. So in order to understand the difference between narcissistic personality disorder and autism, you first need to understand the person's intentions. A narcissist is very well aware that they have been offensive, but they don't care. But someone on the spectrum doesn't have a clue that they may have offended you. Someone with autism may appear to be normal in every way, and they sometimes excel in life tasks, but what they lack is an understanding of other people's emotions. So an individual on the spectrum suffers from what we call mind blindness, and that is an inability to empathize. They really don't understand that other people don't see the world in the same way that they do. On the other hand, the narcissist fully understands the sensitivities of other people all too well. The narcissist is a master manipulator, and they don't care that their actions are hurtful. In fact, the narcissist can intentionally be a very dangerous enemy. Beneath the arrogance that the narcissist displays when other people are around is an ego that has been depleted of feelings of safety and self-regard. When it comes to intimate relationships, the narcissist can launch an attack that is particularly hurtful. The reason for this is that the narcissist is so vulnerable to feelings of shame and self-hatred that they may literally want to destroy anyone who taps into that shame. An individual with narcissistic personality disorder uses their cynical understanding of human nature to gain favor on the one hand and to insult and depersonalize on the other hand. It's because the narcissist is a skilled seducer who can become furious when their efforts fail to produce the desired outcome. So one thing is for certain, anyone that becomes involved with a narcissist is going to be damaged in some way. The narcissist genuinely has no concern whatsoever for the welfare of other people. While the narcissist uses their expertise deliberately, the person with autism has no comprehension as to why other people behave the way that they do. While the person with autism may appear to be arrogant and rude at times, it's because they lack any sense of self-awareness and they really can't grasp the meaning of behaviors that they encounter in other people. So what makes social interactions particularly difficult for a person with autism is that they really don't know what they don't know. A person on the spectrum has no idea that other people have a mind of their own. And people on the spectrum don't want to inflict harm on other people. So if you are ever offended by someone on the spectrum, it's important to remember that their intention was not to harm you. Instead, it was their mind blindness that kicked in, and they really had no idea that they may have hurt someone else's feelings. For someone on the spectrum, friendships are about shared interests and not about emotional connections. Emotions are inexplicable to someone with autism. Their vocabulary is typically limited and sometimes can be very basic. And for many people on the spectrum, their interests are confined to a particular subject, and their interests are often very intense. Another aspect of spending time with someone on the spectrum is that they have no understanding of symbolism or metaphor. So an individual on the spectrum cannot draw inferences or make predictions about outcome. And because of that, they may be surprised by the negative feedback or consequences that they receive from other people. Now, there is evidence that children of people with narcissistic personality disorder or autism do bear a number of traits in common. It's typically because these children are raised by parents who struggle with having an understanding of empathy. And so they grow up believing that, that they are themselves inherently damaged and that somehow it's their own fault. There's a term for those who hold these damaging and intractable beliefs. It's called ongoing traumatic relationship syndrome. And a lack of parental validation can really deeply damage a child and can prove to be very difficult to overcome in life. The narcissist does not care about the damage that their behavior leaves behind, whereas a person on the spectrum doesn't really understand that any damage has occurred. An important thing to remember is that it is wise to protect yourself from a narcissist. And it's important to show a person on the spectrum some latitude because intent makes all the difference. The narcissist's intent is to harm, and the person on the spectrum's intent is not to harm. A person on the spectrum can be self-centered and will engage in a very narrow range of interests and activities. Their social interactions are severely hampered and their conversational skills are limited. You won't see any nonverbal cues in a person with autism, and they aren't able to interpret the nonverbal cues in other people. The body language of a person with autism is typically constricted and a little bit artificial, and they rarely make eye contact, and they are not very expressive in their facial expressions. This kind of body language sometimes is seen in people diagnosed with other disorders like schizotypal disorder. Now let's consider the pathological traits of narcissism. The narcissist switches between social agility and social impairment quite voluntarily and quite intentionally. And I believe that this is the case with Christopher Watts. Most people think that he stayed in the background because he was introverted. I believe that his social dysfunction is actually the result of his conscious conceit and his reluctance to invest his mental energy in cultivating relationships with people that he considered to be inferior and unworthy. However, when he identified a potential source of narcissistic supply, he easily regains his social skills and his charm. It is quite obvious that he is very busy cultivating sources of narcissistic supply in prison. And it's obvious by all of his misguided admirers who sent him money and mail. Now, many narcissists are able to achieve success in life in a variety of areas, but most of the time, the narcissistic functions flawlessly, but ultimately, their rage and their extortion of the narcissistic supply usually puts an end to their careers or their social liaisons. Again, Chris Watts appeared to have achieved some success in life, having a career, marriage, and children, but his rage allowed him to literally annihilate his family and destroy his own future. On the other hand, a person with autism wants to be accepted socially. They want to have friends and get married and have children. However, sometimes they don't have any idea how to go about those things. So the person with autism also has what we call limited affect. Affect in psychology refers to the underlying experience of feelings, emotions, and mood. So a person with autism is largely unaware of the wishes and needs and feelings of other people. And because of this, a person with autism may be perceived by others to be cold or eccentric, insensitive, indifferent, or emotionally absent. To avoid the pain of rejection, They may confine themselves to be quite solitary. They tend to limit their world to a specific topic or hobby or person. And they dive in with so much enthusiasm to the exclusion of all other matters and people. It's their way to control the hurt or to regulate emotional pain. Now, while the narcissist avoids pain by excluding and devaluing and discarding other people, the autistic person achieves the same result by withdrawing and passionately incorporating into his universe only one or two people or one or two subjects of interest. Both narcissists and people on the spectrum are prone to react with depression to any perceived slights or injuries. But the person with autism is at far more risk of self-harm or suicide, as opposed to the narcissist, who is typically not inclined to commit suicide or harm themselves. When it comes to the use of language, patients with most personality disorders are very skilled at communicating, and they manipulate language. Actually, people with narcissistic personality disorder and some of the other personality disorders like histrionic, antisocial, paranoid, these people's social skills and language skills far surpass the average person. The narcissist, for example, hones instrument of language and uses it to obtain narcissistic supply. They also use language as a weapon to annihilate their enemies or to discard their former sources of narcissistic supply. Narcissists actually derive narcissistic supply from their innate ability to be gregarious. On the other hand, a person with autism has a far more limited range of topics, and they fail to observe conversational rules and etiquette, such as taking turns speaking, the give and take in a conversation. So as I mentioned, people with autism are unaware and unable to decipher body language and external social and nonverbal cues and nonverbal gestures. They are also largely incapable of monitoring their own misbehavior. Narcissists are typically very inconsiderate, and they can control their behavior, and they are fully aware of the reactions that they get from other people. They just choose to ignore these reactions. Now let's look at some of the things that we look for when diagnosing autism. Under the heading of communication, autistic children don't respond to their name by 12 months of age. They typically can't explain what they want. Their language skills are slow to develop. Their speech is typically delayed. They have trouble following directions. Sometimes they appear to be able to hear you, but other times they don't. These children don't point, and they don't wave. They don't wave bye-bye if you try to get them to wave. Although they used to be able to speak a few words or babble, some of the children stopped doing that. As far as social behavior, they don't smile. These children don't smile when someone smiles at them. They have very poor eye contact. They seem to prefer to play by themselves. They seem to be very independent for their age, and they tend to tune people out. Some of the stereotypical behaviors that we see are that they get kind of stuck doing the same thing over and over, and they can't seem to move on to other things. Um, they'll show a deep attachment to toys, objects, routines. They spend a lot of time lining things up or putting things in a certain order, maybe by color or shape. And sometimes they'll repeat words or phrases over and over again. They also typically have some unusual patterns of movement. Um, Sometimes we see what we call hand flapping. They'll just flap their hands or they'll rock back and forth. They don't seem to understand or know how to play with toys. They'll walk on their tippy toes when they are first learning to walk. Sometimes they will throw violent tantrums. Sometimes they're overly active, uncooperative, or resistant to instruction. And sometimes they're oversensitive to noise. They get overstimulated in their environment. Sometimes they're also very sensitive to textures of clothing or food. There's Thor. So thank you for watching, and I appreciate all of you for tuning in. In my next video, I'm going to be delving into what it's like entering into a marriage, into a family that has narcissistic traits. So see you there. Thank you.